Welcome to Meeting of the Minds. Join host Sue Lani Madsen for a half-hour conversation with community leaders on how we can exercise civility in the public arena without backing down on our ideals. Welcome to Meeting of the Minds.
Totally different.
Okay, well, I guess we're ready to start with this first edition of the Meeting of the Minds. I'm Sue Lani Madsen, and I'm pleased today to welcome two community leaders for a conversation on civility in the public arena. Welcome to Stephanie Cates, Chair of the Republican Party of Spokane County, and Andrew Biviano, Chair of the Spokane County Democrats.
Thanks for having us.
I'm so glad that you both agreed to come and have this chat, and I promised I wasn't trying to make you debate each other, but we could have a little conversation about how we can be a little more civil, get a little more done. And I had the whole thing made me think of rugby. My daughter played rugby at WSU, and rugby players go really hard into the scrum and come up dirty and muddy, and but they all shake hands at the end of the game, and they're a pretty civil bunch. I was really impressed with the rugby team. I think politics is like that. This is political rugby.
Good sportsmanship.
Good
is always
sportsmanship.
appropriate.
Exactly. So that's what we're about today. So I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about how the news covers politics. I know both of you got quoted back and forth, and because there was an incident, and so let's have a little conversation about how that feels to be on the subject side instead of the reader side of the news. What's maybe your biggest frustration and compliment for how the news media gets information out there for you, and on behalf of you and your roles as chairs of political parties? So, who's going to go first? Stephanie?
I think they like to see a fight, and I know there have been words tossed around like sparring. We were verbally sparring, or like taking jabs at each other and everything.
I don't think you were in the same room, though.
Right.
kind of hard to land a punch that way.
Right.
Yeah.
So and it's Andrew and I met a few months ago at another event, and we were actually kind of talking about two sides of an issue, the minimum wage, and that was the first time we met, and I thought
sparring, and that actually was a debate.
It was it was a good substantive conversation. Yeah. We were trying to be persuasive, and all good. There's no animosity, definitely, between us.
No, none, really. And I think to answer your question, I very much respect what the news media has to do as far as distilling a lot of different sides of a story into something that's fair and even-handed, and I think they do a very good job about that. I think the struggle for me, I've learned, is you don't get to choose which quote they put in the story. And which angle they're going to go with. And you might say a whole bunch of stuff, and one thing that you regret saying is the one that gets printed. So it requires some more discipline to kind of keep your message clear, because otherwise, if you don't have a clear message, you leave it to somebody else to interpret it for you.
Yeah, and I know what you both mean by that, because I've been in the same position as both of you as a county party chair. Before I took this turn into journalism as an amateur. And as a candidate, you could give an entire lecture at a whole candidate forum, and the one thing you wish you could pull back in your mouth is the one that gets quoted.
Absolutely.
Right, exactly.
Well, do you think there's any one medium that's doing a better job right now of communicating the messages that you want to get out there? Of all the options, we have so many options. Which ones do you think are doing the best job of connecting with people?
I think these issues are so complicated that long-form journalism is probably the only thing that can give the time and space to the full discussion of these. I think everything does a good job, but sound bites, 30 seconds, not enough, and they're going to be forced to, I think, make more problems by making things seem more binary than they actually are.
I would agree with that, and I think definitely social media has brought forward a way to reach people directly without a filter, and put out statements, have live videos that you yourself are pushing out to your supporters. So yeah, the soundbite,
it's kind of a curse, but it's a necessity because people are looking for those short bits as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and they react to them. They react to a headline, the clickbait type of headline that, and that just gets them up in arms, I think, before really researching all the facts.
140 characters. It's on and off. And Twitter's a wonderful thing, and it's also a terrible thing.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of prose haiku, yeah, with all of those same limitations. Anything that you'd like to see happen a little bit more in the Spokane media? One of the things that we do at SpokaneTalksOnline.com is that we're really looking at a region, and especially on days when the passes are all closed, we really are a pretty insulated region of our own. And how can we get, what are good sources besides SpokaneTalksOnline.com for finding, how do you connect with like the whole 5th Congressional District? There are so many different media markets in that, mini media markets. What are some things that you're taking a look at?
Well, just something that came out today, the Inlander, our weekly publication, had a piece that resulted from a sit-down interview with me and with Andrew separately. I thought that was very, well-balanced and fair. And I would say sometimes people on my side of the political spectrum maybe don't trust some of those media outlets. But I think it's always healthy to actually sit down and have a conversation and, have the reporter maybe get more of your perspective and realize, we're real people and, we have different opinions and we can respect that.
I would like to see media keep doing more of the coverage of the underlying issues and the people that politics are meant to serve, rather than covering the division itself. I think it gets amplified that way. I think that there's too much stories about point scoring and who's gotten a leg up on who else, and we're ignoring the fact that there's actually people that are suffering, and that would, I think, end some of the rancor because we don't focus on what really matters.
That would be a way of finding common ground. It's really looking at the root of whatever the talking points are about. Talking points become a shorthand
and less of looking for that mic drop moment.
Right.
That zinger.
One of the things I was looking at when I was just prepping for this was, and I gave you each a copy of it, is this really interesting pyramid of levels of argument. And it came from Barb Chamberlain, who used to be here in Spokane doing everything bike.
Right.
She and I always got along really well, even though if you lined up our resumes side by side, we would look like we don't have a whole lot in common because we've got, well, that's a different story. I have to invite Barb over sometime when she's back to visit. But it's starting with name calling at the bank. Okay, that doesn't really get you anywhere. Ad hominem, I think people hear that term and they don't know what it means, but it's attacking the messenger really instead of the message. And to the extent that we can start operating a little bit higher up the chain, responding to the tone people say, the tone makes a big difference these days. And I just heard somebody tell me that the state legislature right now is really grumpy. A lot of things coming out of the legislature are a little maybe not so working so well together, and the same thing out of Congress. Because of the situation in DC and in Olympia, each of you represents a party that's in a position of being a minority and a majority. And let's talk a little bit about what it means to be a responsible majority of leadership and a responsible loyal opposition when you're in the minority.
Sure. I think actually the model that I use, you used rugby earlier on. I think for me that what resonates the best is marriage. We're in an arranged marriage, Steffi and I, not by our parents, but by the Constitution. We've been arranged to be together in this process to together try to move our community forward. And actually, I was a psychology major, and there's a professor I studied in University of Washington, John Gottman, who did a lot of great writing about what makes marriages work and fail. And he can predict with 87% accuracy whether a marriage will last. And one of the things that always stuck with me is that we spend too much time talking about how people are saying something rather than what they're actually saying.
Oh, you sounded sarcastic, so you must.
Right. Yeah, well, he used an example of two couples. You can see one of them where if you looked at just on video with no words, they look like they're getting along fine because they're talking to each other very calmly. But with the transcript, you might see that they're actually horrifyingly arguing and calling each other terrible names and putting each other down in a calm manner. Or it could be doing the silent treatment, which is the most uncivil thing you can do, of ignoring someone and acting like they don't exist. Same time, you could have a couple that's screaming and yelling, but what they're saying is,
Like the British Parliament?
I need you to meet my needs. And, okay, what are your needs? I want you to listen to me more. Okay, I'll do that. And it looks like it's a terrible fight, but actually it's a really productive conversation. And so sometimes I think when we're calling for civility, but without actually talking about what the person's saying, we're just saying, don't be so loud.
Talking about tone instead of about
exactly.
content.
And
Okay.
I think that that's important because it's too much to ask sometimes of people who are very upset, especially if, I'm ignoring you and that upsets you, and then you yell at me for ignoring you. I can't then turn around and say, well, why are you yelling at me? And act like I'm the victim here. There needs to be a recognition that that's really what this is about. And the tone it matters, but it's not the main thing.
Yes, it's kind of a fog we do need to work to see through.
Yeah. Tone matters, and I think also separating the ideas from the person behind them. And, you may not agree with someone's ideas and ideology. It doesn't mean you have to immediately jump to, well, you're an idiot, or you're a racist, or you're a snowflake, or something. These labels and, unfair categorizations of people, it just shuts down the conversation. If we're talking about having a civil discourse, then you pretty much nix that right off the bat when names are being called. And I see it on my side. I see it from the other side as well. So, and obviously Andrew and I, as leaders of our party, we can't police that on every with every single person and go down on every Facebook comment and say, shouldn't do that. But I think we have the responsibility to set the tone for our respective political organizations. And, what I'm trying to set as a tone is we can be positive. We can agree to disagree. And, there are appropriate places for that and times for that. And maybe some that aren't appropriate. So,
but to answer your other question about responsibilities of the majority versus the minority, I really do think that the majority has a greater responsibility. I don't like quoting Spider-Man, but with power comes responsibility.
That's okay. Spider-Man's okay.
It's true. Cheesy, but true. And it's the best advice I can give you as the party that's taken the majority nationally, is that unless you listen really hard to the other party and the people that feel left out, like we didn't do as well as we should have 8 years ago, you'll be out of power really quick, as we showed. Right. That there has to be, and the responsibility, I think, falls to the people who are not upset, who just won, who are in a good mood, who are not afraid to extend the olive branch, and to maybe forgive the people who are terrified, who have been through the most uncivil campaign they've ever seen with the most uncivil candidate ever been elected. I think Republicans can agree. The things he said about his own primary challengers were horrifyingly uncivil, that things are going to get nasty. And so people acting out of defensiveness and fear, if people can empathize with that and see, okay, well, you can see why they're upset. That's an overwhelmingly powerful force. And that will discharge the tension more than anything else and disarm those who are angry. And then another thing is give people a chance to speak their mind and be heard in a way that lets them feel heard. And then they won't feel the impulse to be uncivil and interrupt speeches and shout things, because they don't want to do that. They need an outlet. And if they don't have an outlet, that's not going to solve the problem.
So, Stephanie, would you have some advice for the Democrats in the majority in Olympia, where the situation's reversed?
It certainly is. And, recently we saw that our Senator Danzel from the 7th District stepped down to take an appointment with the administration. And there was some jockeying going on to, kind of take advantage of that situation and pass some legislation that would have raised taxes and everything.
But they didn't, though.
But they didn't.
They didn't.
No, they all played rugby for a day and then they gave it up. Yeah.
So, it's just, I think it's just allowing the other side to be heard and, maybe having the conversation about funding education, which the Republicans did, and they put forth a plan to fund education first, which is the paramount duty of the state according to our Constitution. So, you know, it's there's a tendency on both sides to say, you know, we won, you lost, get over it.
Suck it up, Buttercup.
Yeah, and that has happened.
That's not very productive.
And I do think, you know, that kind of rallies the other side, as we're seeing now. You know.
Well, I know in the U.S. Senate there was a reference to a rule about not impugning the motives that came up in a debate, and I did some searching this morning. I was trying to find where that phrase first came up into political use, and it was actually Abraham Lincoln's Fourth State of the Union in 1864. And just interesting that it goes back that far, that to have to remind everybody to let's not assume bad motives. If you know, try and dig to find that common ground where there is a common motive. We'd all like educated kids, right? So that's why paramount duty is cited as an underlying requirement. But we may have very different ways of thinking how's the best way to do that. And that's part of that, focusing on where's the point, how far back do we have to go to that we agree, and building up from there. I think I left my phone on in the other room.
Nice ringtone.
Oh, well.
Dance break.
You can find it. So let's see here. I was looking to see where we were doing here. I also, there was an interesting quote I found about that communicating, if you're going to listen to an other side, that kind of goes all the way, not just to our leaders, but to us in the community. And it was a writer, Lawrence Lessig, who's an attorney, wrote a book called Free Culture, who said, "We, the most powerful democracy in the world, have developed a strong norm against talking about politics. It's fine to talk about politics with people you agree with, but it is rude to argue about politics with people you disagree with. Then political discourse becomes isolated, and isolated discourse becomes more extreme. We say what our friends want to hear and hear very little beyond what our friends say." I think there is something to that. It's certainly easier, right? It's easier to have a group that you all agree with. But let's talk a little bit about how we try to make sure our bubbles are a little more penetrable. How do we maintain friendships and conversations with people that have something different to bring to our point of view? Facebook works if you have somebody that you can communicate with in writing without getting each other ticked off.
Right. And that form
could
of
be a tough one.
communication is really hard to get someone's. A number of times I see people reading someone else's words as an angry, spiteful thing, and the person who wrote it had none of that intent whatsoever. So that's not really great. Not seeing someone's facial expression and tone of voice. When people ask me what they can do to help, a lot of times I'll say, just get out there and talk to your neighbors and people at your kid's school, because that's what's missing. I think the problem with our government comes from problems with our citizenship. That what you just described, people feeling uncomfortable talking about, I think the most important issues facing us today is a big problem. And talking about it more makes it easier and makes it more respectful, and you start to have a broader worldview. But Facebook is not a good way, because you silo yourself. But just keep at it. I like talking to people who disagree much more than people who agree, because it's not much point in the latter.
Well, within the Republican Party, there are a lot of people who disagree on some key issues. And so, I think it starts there, where, if we're trying to build a big tent, which I believe in, which Reagan believed in, we should allow for some of those differences, because you don't grow a political party by exclusion. You grow it by inclusion. So, and as far as talking with people on the other side of the political spectrum, I think that's appropriate too. And I just talking about social media, I know I have a lot of people who all of a sudden dropped from my friends list because of something I posted that was politically, not their cup of tea, and that's unfortunate too, and that doesn't help at all. So, whether you're having the conversation in person or on social media, I think you should just be open, and again, not impugn bad motives to people, and just write them off.
Not writing people off is a good thing to do.
And one thing we can all do better is remember that something might not be very important to us, but it matters a whole lot to somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk very cavalierly about something as just a political issue for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's about funding healthcare, and it's about a cost analysis. Well, for someone else who has a serious health issues, that's a different conversation altogether. Same
Mm-hmm.
thing with quality issues. If you're outside that group that feels threatened, it's very different than being inside that group. Immigration, everything. And I think that when we get into these conversations, we need just, I'm not saying we need to save space or anything like that, but we could all do a better job if we want civility by understanding why it is that someone has such a strong view and maybe takes us back a little bit by recognizing that it's important to them.
I think that is one of the downfalls of social media. It's not just about the facial expressions, but you don't have any idea of what their day was just like.
Sure.
That they're bringing to whatever their situation is. And there's so much information missing in those conversations. They can be a lot of fun, but they can certainly be sadly misinterpreted. How about a little bit of talk about talking points? Those get tossed around. Okay, so you're both representing a party. You know, that's an organization. And I have sympathy for both of you in that. Like I said, I've served as a county party chair.
It's an honor.
It's an honor.
And a privilege.
But you are trying to get everybody they have some things in common, but they have some things they want to argue about.
Right.
But these are
Right.
people who have agreed that they wanted to come and argue, supposedly, right? I also had run a campaign. I first met you, Andrew, when we were
Right.
doing Meet the Candidate. You
Yeah.
ran a hard race for county commissioner, and then you threw yourself into organizing in the party. That's kind of my story too. I've been there, and it took me a while when I first got into politics to understand talking points. So a lot of people, I think, don't understand what the purpose is, and they can be useful, but they can be misused. And that just the word talking points gets used as a curse word. Could you say a little bit about what you think about when you have to come up with something like that? I know you both will be in the position of in-depth discussion is great, but there's times when you have to do talking points. So what should people think about when they hear those?
Well, from a communication standpoint, you know, I have a marketing background, a PR background, so talking points are a big thing for me, just in terms of staying on message, you know, and communicating what you wish to get across in a persuasive manner. So when I hear talking points, I don't think, you know, I have no negative connotation to them. You know, but maybe they could be considered spin or.
I think some people think that, that must just be a talking point, as if that means it's not sincere. And I think that's what. I mean, they can be sincere. They're just kind of like an outline. Is kind of the way I see them.
Yeah, talking points are similar to what we use in the law. I'm a lawyer, and you have to have a theme for.
So we have a
any
lawyer in
case.
marketing. So
Yeah.
you're both selling
And so
something.
we're trying to persuade.
You're both okay. You're both trying to persuade.
And that's a good thing if it's used for good purposes. Yeah, it's just a matter for me. Like I said earlier about the media, if I talk for an hour, I've lost some control over what my message is going to be, and talking points might help me just remind myself that these are the priorities and the values I really want to convey and the important stuff, and I don't want to get distracted by that. Yeah, I think people use it as a slur, but I don't think that's accurate. I think spin is something that maybe should be frowned upon, but talking points just means that you're trying to strengthen your message.
And I think boil it down to the essence and speak to the person who's, you know, on the other end receiving the message, so they understand in just clear, concise terms what you're trying to convey. So
Okay, so it's just the bullet points of communication, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It may just be shorthand so you can keep on message.
Anyone who doesn't like talking points has not had a long interview with the reporter and they realize how important they are.
Well, one last area for discussion is George Washington's farewell address. He made it very clear he saw the downside of political parties. You each represent the two major parties, but when I put this notice up on my Facebook, I got a note from somebody who wanted me to invite a libertarian. I said they were going to have to just let me stand in as the small L
Small L.
libertarian. But there are other parties. What do you see as any comments on the strengths or weakness of two versus multiple parties, as there are in some other countries?
If you don't mind, this is one of my favorite debates I like having with other political junkies.
Okay.
I actually think it's inaccurate to say we only have two political parties. We have basically a playoff system or political parties. Where in a parliamentary system, you can elect 5 or 6 different parties and then work it out amongst themselves after the election.
Yeah.
We have to work it out before the election, but we still work it out. So I noticed in the GOP primary, there was 5 very distinct parties that were all represented. There was the Tea Party, traditional conservatives, Christian right, the libertarians, Trumpism, which is different from everything else. On our side, we had at least 2, Bernie and Hillary, right? And you decide from those who's going to work it out and win and go on to the next level. And I think that worked pretty well to get the different ideas out there and then weigh them and vote on which ones we prefer. And there's still vibrant, active wings of both parties that do that. So I think that we're doing a disservice to ourselves. And I think it's bad because it disheartens people and makes people think there's no point in engaging in the political process because there's only 2 parties. That's not right. There's plenty of places for you. You can find a group that works for you and then just work in whichever one of the major parties is most receptive to your party's goals.
Yeah, I think it's ideologies, and there are some distinct ideologies within Republican Party and Democrat Party. So, I believe the same thing, and we're not to the point where there is a valid third party in this country, and so people have to decide, am I going to vote straight R, straight D, or, a little in between? And then you talk about issues, going back to the minimum wage. Is it your ideology that the government should dictate how you pay people and what you pay people, or should the free market decide that? So, within some of those issues, not just candidates, but issues, I think, people can take a side. And people generally, they decide either, yes, we want more government control over our lives or less. So, and the
that
2
goes
parties
back
are
to
clear.
The Federalists and the Anti-Federalists.
Right, it does.
And
I've had that same thought about the parliamentary system when people have suggested that we go to a parliamentary system for better representation. Is that I've seen that same thing, that it really is it's a pre-election parliamentary organization.
Right, you still have to, in a parliamentary system, figure out alliances to get a majority to go together. It's just before or after. And and the parties have some problems. Like any big organization does,
Right.
they're private entities. Fix them. The other thing I want to mention too is that people blame the parties for there not being a third party, but it's just math. If a third party rises up, it has to take votes from one of the other 2 parties, and then the other party wins.
It just rearranges.
And it just rearranges things. What actually happens, we have third parties all the time, but they just end up taking over one of the existing parties. They change.
That's
quite
kind of been the
often.
history, is that if a third party gets strong enough, it finds its way to influence.
It
one
either
of the-
replaces with actual name, like the Republicans replaced the Whigs, or it takes over from the inside and redefines what the party means. But there's plenty of ways for people to be involved.
Okay. So that's a good place to bring this to a close, because the point is that we've now had a transition that has got everybody paying attention, lots of more people paying attention, and if they want to get involved and be a part of this reorganization that goes on kind of what seems behind the scenes, they need to contact maybe either of your organizations and see if they fit in. I'll give you a chance to give a little pitch to how they could find you guys.
Okay.
How would they find you, Stephanie?
Well, online it's SpokaneGOP.com, and on Facebook it's Spokane GOP. We have YouTube, we have Instagram, and we are interested in people just getting involved, whether it's on the clerical side or becoming a precinct committee officer. We're filling a lot of precinct committee officer positions right now. A lot of people are energized. So,
and for people who don't know, those are pretty critical, because if there is a vacancy, it's the PCOs, the precinct committee officers, that come up with the list that the replacements are selected from.
right, it's the most grassroots of any elected office.
And Andrew?
We're at SpokaneDemocrats.org, on Facebook as Spokane County Democrats. We have Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff as well. Again, PCO is on both sides the most important, easiest grassroots thing you can do. And I'm also encouraging people to just do whatever they feel fits with their lives. I don't want to structure it too much. We have plenty of structure for those who need it. Like I said before, if your mission tells you to go talk to your neighbors around you and just knock on their doors and say hi, let's talk about our community a little bit.
Okay.
That's actually much more effective than a candidate knocking on their door, because that's always suspicious. But a neighbor block party, anything you want to do, that's probably the best way to get civics back into our life again.
Okay, well, my goal was that we could do a little to fight apathy. I think apathy will kill our
Yeah.
country off quicker than anything, and what we should all have learned is it's good to argue about politics. Just make sure you're arguing about the issue and not who said it and how they said it.
and not attacking
Okay.
the person.
Focus on the issues. Thank you both for coming. I really
Sure.
appreciated
You're
the
welcome.
conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Meeting of the Minds is produced in Spokane, Washington by Spokane Talks Online LLC, which is solely responsible for its content. To recommend a guest or topic, or to see this program again, please visit our website, SpokaneTalksOnline.com, and join us next time on Meeting of the Minds.